Hey guys, I'm Anna, and welcome to The Well of Your Secrets. This is a place where real stories come to life. Your stories. If there's something you've been keeping inside, a secret, a memory, or just something you've never said out loud, I'm here to listen. Send your story to my Instagram, the link's in the description, and maybe yours will be the next one we share. So grab your headphones, get comfy, and let's dive in. Do you believe some people get born twice, once in flesh and once in pain? Emily Carter was one of them. A 26-year-old girl from a small town in Texas. She grew up in a tiny, cozy house full of love from her mom and dad. She dreamed of becoming a fashion designer, loved colors, laughed loud, and believed every story could have a happy ending. But that happiness turned out to be a short-lived lie. When she was 22, everything fell apart. Her dad, John Carter, lost everything in a huge business deal gone wrong. Debt collectors started showing up, threatening, shouting, and one day he came. Richard Collins, a powerful man in his late 60s, rich enough to make or break anyone in town. He walked into their house with a cold smile and said, "I can save your family, but there's a price." That price was Emily. Her dad refused at first, but fear broke his pride, and in the end, he said yes. Emily was forced to marry Richard. No love, no warmth, just silence and pain. The mansion she moved into wasn't a home. It was a golden cage. The workers looked at her with pity, and Richard treated her like a decoration in his perfect, expensive life. He gave orders, not affection. To make it worse, he already had grown children, her age, and they saw her as a disgrace. They mocked her, whispered insults, and treated her like a thief who stole her mother's place. But in that cold world, a small light appeared. She got pregnant. For the first time, she wanted to live. And when she held her baby boy, Ethan, the world suddenly made sense again. He was fragile, eyes wide with innocent wonder, but doctors said he had a brain condition, delays in movement and speech. She stayed up every night beside him, telling stories, singing softly, dreaming of the day he'd walk and call her mom. But Richard saw him as a flaw. He said, "I don't need a broken son." That sentence shattered her completely. 4 years passed, all of them heavy, gray, endless. Until one day, everything changed. Richard died, a sudden heart attack. The mansion filled with chaos. His children stormed into the lawyer's office and discovered part of the inheritance was in her name. They lost their minds. They beat her, smashed mirrors, tore her clothes, and threw her out of the mansion while she screamed. When she tried to grab her son, one of them hit her and said, "Forget him, just like we'll forget you were ever here." She stumbled into the rain, hair plastered to her face, bruises everywhere, but the real pain was in her heart. She sat on the sidewalk for hours until she couldn't even feel time anymore. And right then, she decided she wouldn't die here, not in the place that destroyed her. She sold her only ring, paid a smuggler, and got on a boat heading for Italy. A long, stormy journey, waves crashing, children crying, Emily holding tight to a photo of her stolen son. She laughed and cried at the same time. "Maybe I'll die here," she whispered, "but at least I'll die free." When she finally reached the shores of Naples, she looked like a ghost, but she was alive. She started over from zero. Got a job washing dishes in a small restaurant, learned a few Italian words, rented a tiny room with a broken bed and a squeaky door. But for the first time in years, she could breathe. Then, one ordinary day, a man walked into the restaurant. Tall, dark hair, eyes full of mystery, the kind that could make a whole room go silent. His name was Lorenzo Moretti, son of Italy's most feared mafia boss, Don Alessandro Moretti. From the first glance, sparks flew. He looked at her with curiosity. She glared back with defiance. There was fire between them. Not passion yet, but challenge. He started coming every day. Same table, same cappuccino. Big tip, no words. She hated him, but couldn't ignore the way her heart raced. Then one rainy night, chaos erupted outside. Shouting, gunshots, panic. Lorenzo was hit. Everyone ran except her. Emily rushed to him, dragged him inside, and pressed on his wound with trembling hands. When he opened his eyes, he whispered, "You're crazy. You could have died." She said softly, "I already did once. This time, I feel alive." That was the beginning. He kept coming back, not as a mafia prince, but as a man. He told her about his brutal childhood, the father who taught him to be ruthless. She told him about her lost son. And with every talk, their walls began to fall. But the mafia doesn't forgive love. When his father found out about the foreign girl, he went mad, locked Lorenzo up, and shouted, "Love is weakness. I didn't raise a weak man." But Lorenzo chose differently. He ran away, left everything behind. The money, the power, the name. And that's when the hunt began. Gunfire, blood, fear. They were chased from city to city, barely surviving. One night, they were trapped. Bullets shattered windows, and Emily threw herself over him to protect him. A bullet grazed his shoulder. He looked at her through the pain and whispered, "You're the reason I know what life really is." They escaped. Barely. For months, they hid, changing names, towns, faces, until they found a small coastal village, quiet and peaceful. There, they built a new life. They opened a tiny cafe called Ethan's Place, named after the son she still dreamed of finding. She baked cakes, he served coffee with a smile. Every morning, they watched the sunrise together. She'd look at him and say, "I never thought love could save anyone." He'd smile and reply, "I never knew pain could create a miracle." To the villagers, they were just a normal couple. No one knew their past was soaked in blood and tears. But to them, it was all worth it, because they finally had peace. Every night, when the sea breeze brushed against her face, she'd hold his hand and whisper, "If there's another life after this, I hope we start it together, without pain." And he'd answer softly, "Pain is what made me worthy of you." Emily wasn't just a girl forced into marriage. She was a woman who rose from ashes, who turned loss into strength, and suffering into a love that transformed a man from the darkness. And when she stood by the shore watching the waves, she'd smile and think to herself, "I was born twice, but the second time, it was by my own hands." About a year and a half had passed since they opened their little cafe, Ethan's Place. The village was peaceful, sitting right by the sea. The people were kind and simple, and the cafe had become part of their daily life. Lorenzo made coffee every morning. Emily baked muffins, and the smell of vanilla mixed with the salty sea breeze. Everything seemed perfect. But deep down, a quiet fear still lived inside them. A fear of the past, of the name Moretti, a shadow that refused to fade. One calm evening, as they were closing up after sunset, Emily noticed a man standing far away, wearing a black suit, smoking a cigarette, his eyes fixed on them, cold and watchful. She whispered, "Lorenzo, have you seen that man before?" He hesitated, trying to hide his tension. "No, but he doesn't look like he's from around here." The night passed, but her unease didn't. And the next morning, she found a small envelope by the cafe door. Inside, a single note, written neatly in Italian. "Blood never dies. Son of Moretti." Her hands went cold. When she showed it to Lorenzo, his face turned pale. He said quietly, "My father's still alive." The words stabbed through the silence. They had believed Don Alessandro was dead after the Mafia war. But monsters, they don't die that easily. From that day, their world started to crumble. Every night, strange noises at the door, shadows moving outside, people asking about them in whispers. Lorenzo tried to calm her. "They won't stop, but we won't be afraid." But she was terrified, not for herself, but for the love she had built with her own hands. Then, something unexpected happened. Emily got an email from a small hospital in Texas. The message said her son, Ethan, was still alive. A nurse had hidden him years ago, safing him when Richard's sons tried to send him to an institution. The email had a photo, a 5-year-old boy smiling, his eyes full of the same innocence she used to see before bedtime. Emily cried for hours, shaking, laughing, not believing it was real. Her boy, the one she dreamed about every night, was alive. Lorenzo held her and said, "We'll bring him back, no matter what." And so began their second journey. Not to escape, but to return. But before they could leave, the man in the black suit showed up again. He stood in front of the cafe and said coldly, "Your father wants to see you, Lorenzo. This is your last chance." Lorenzo looked him in the eye and replied, "I don't have a father." The man smirked. "You'll learn soon enough. Whoever runs from his blood drowns in it." That same night, the cafe burned down. Flames devoured everything in minutes. Emily screamed. Lorenzo dragged her out, eyes filled with fury, watching their dream turn to ashes. He clenched his fists and said, "No more running. Whatever my father started, I'll finish it." They fled to Rome in secret, and from there planned a dangerous trip to America. Lorenzo reached out to an old Mafia contact, Vito, a man who owed him a favor. Vito forged new passports and told him, "This isn't the end of the war, just the beginning." Days later, they landed in New York, a huge, dazzling, merciless city, a place where everyone's running and no one really sees each other. They started tracking down the nurse who'd sent the email. She was living in a small town near Dallas, Texas. They took a 2-day train ride. Long, quiet, heavy with emotion. Emily sat by the window thinking, "When I see him, will he remember me? Or has time stolen my face from his heart?" And then they saw him. A little boy playing in a park, laughing, the same smile, the same eyes. When he noticed her, he froze. They stared at each other for what felt like forever. Then he ran toward her with all his strength, threw himself into her arms and whispered, "Mom?" Tears fell without words. Every ache, every year of loneliness washed away in that single moment. But happiness didn't last. The next day, the nurse called, terrified. There are people asking about the boy, the same ones who took him before. Emily looked at Lorenzo and said, "They found us." That night marked the beginning of the real war. Lorenzo made his choice. He would face his father once and for all. He told Emily, "I'm going to him. If I don't come back, take Ethan and go. Back to the sea. Back to where we began." But she shook her head. "If our end is coming, it's coming with us together." They walked into the old Mafia headquarters in New York. Armed guards everywhere. Walls covered with old photos. Lorenzo as a young man, beside his father. And in the center, sitting like a king, Don Alessandro Moretti. An old man with gray, piercing eyes that could cut through your soul. He said calmly, "I knew you'd come back, but I didn't expect you to bring your weakness with you." Lorenzo raised his gun. "My weakness? She's the only strength I've ever had." Chaos exploded. Gunfire, shattered glass, Emily shielding Ethan, trying to escape, Lorenzo fighting his father's men one by one. And then, father and son stood face to face. Don Alessandro aimed his gun and said, "I raised you to be a leader, not to die for a woman like her." Lorenzo's voice was cold and steady. "Leaders like you forget what it means to be human." He pulled the trigger. The shot echoed. Don Alessandro fell, and with him, the end of an empire. After that night, they escaped New York and returned to Italy. But this time, not as fugitives, as free souls. They bought a small house by the sea and rebuilt the cafe, again called Ethan's Place. Every morning, Ethan played in the sand, his laughter blending with the sound of waves. Lorenzo would watch him from a distance, smiling quietly. One night, Emily rested her head on his shoulder and asked, "Do you think we'll ever stop running?" He smiled softly. "We're not running anymore, baby. We finally made it." And at sunrise, she stood by the shore, wind in her hair, her son in her arms, Lorenzo holding her hand from behind. The sea whispered their story, a song of pain, love, and rebirth. She lifted her head, smiled, and said gently, "I was born twice, but this time, not to live, this time, to love."